So I've been doing a lot of thinking lately. Hi, by the way, about eating disorders. Surprise! But more specifically, I've been doing a lot of thinking lately about the ways that eating disorders are portrayed in mainstream media, and how pop culture tells a whole lot of half-truths about what life with an eating disorder is really like. And by I've been thinking about it, I mean it's been making me really fucking mad. There's this really prevalent narrative arc that exists in pretty much every eating disorder story that ever garners significant attention. And it tends to look like this. Well-to-do young white woman develops an eating disorder, often in relation to grappling with childhood trauma or growing up with difficult or destructive parents. Well-to-do young white woman, after spiraling into near oblivion, seeks treatment for her eating disorder, which usually results in her being admitted to a residential facility, and eventually commits to finding herself again, with a new sense of hope on the road to recovery. And that's cool and all, if you fit into that box, which most people don't. And the problem with every eating disorder story we hear fitting into the aforementioned description is that then we buy into them. We use them as examples to hold our own disorders up to. We use them to judge and determine what is and isn't really sick. We start to trust that these narratives represent real eating disorders, and that experiences that fall outside of these confines just don't count. And that's dangerous. So I'm in the process of working with NEDA, that's the National Eating Disorders Association, to curate an anthology that reflects eating disorder recovery stories that fall outside of this dominant paradigm, which is awesome. But in the meantime, I want to give you this, very shareable by the way, list of 10 things I wish people understood about eating disorders. You ready? Eating disorders do not discriminate. There's this really destructive myth that eating disorders only happen to, well, as I said before, young, well-to-do white women. But it's a lie! It doesn't matter if you're a dude, or a person of color, or someone in the queer or trans community. It doesn't matter if you're a person without a whole lot of money, or someone who doesn't live in the Western world. Your religion, your age, your ability, your education, your employment status, your family dynamics, your favorite color. None of it matters. An eating disorder can strike anyone. There are more than 2 eating disorders. Generally, when people refer to eating disorders as a whole, they're secretly really only referring to anorexia and bulimia nervosis. As if there aren't all sorts of disordered eating behaviors that happen between and beyond. As if there aren't subtypes of those 2 disorders. As if binge eating disorder just doesn't exist. All eating disorders are serious, and all eating disorders deserve attention. Eating disorders are mental illnesses with physical side effects. That means that they can't be simplified into the physical side effects. Anorexia isn't defined by restricting calories. Bulimia isn't defined by purging intake. Binge eating disorder isn't defined by eating large quantities of food. At the end of the day, eating disorders aren't really about food. They're so much more complicated than that. And when you try to simplify them, you really do a disservice. Eating disorders do not determine your body type. You can dangerously restrict calories and not be thin. You can binge and still be thin. Assuming that everyone with an eating disorder must look a certain way, usually mistaken to mean that anyone who restricts or purges must be skeletal and anyone who binges must be fat, only leads to people who need help not getting help. Similarly, your body type doesn't determine whether or not you have an eating disorder. The poorly thought out joke of casually tossing questions like, what are you, anorexic, at thin people? Or assuming that anyone who is overweight, which is a ridiculous term in the first place, must have an unhealthy relationship with food, is damaging, not only to the psyches of the people whose feelings you're directly hurting, but also to the eating disorder community as a whole. Eating disorders are not a choice. No one wakes up one day and says, you know what would be really fun? Putting myself through hell. No one does that. Eating disorders choose you, and as such, giving advice like, just eat, really isn't helpful. You can't tell a depressive to just cheer up. You can't tell someone with an anxiety disorder to just relax. You can't tell someone with an eating disorder to just choose not to have an eating disorder. Eating disorders are not diets. Why do I even have to say that? Recovery is a long, hard process. It has to be deliberate. And it's a battle every single day. But it's so worth it, and it is possible. Recovery doesn't look the same for everyone. Just like eating disorders differ person to person, recovery processes do too. There is no perfect recovery, and a relapse isn't a failure. Every day that you wake up and say, to hell with you, eating disorder, you're already winning. Eating disorders matter. Raising consciousness about them is important. And if the current coverage of eating disorders, either in the media or in the psych field itself, doesn't represent your struggle, you're allowed to be angry. And I encourage you to speak up, because your experience is valid and your voice matters. So, if you'd like to contribute your eating disorder to my personal narrative project, check the video information box for directions. And join me, along with a bunch of other awesome panelists, for the Adios ED chat on Twitter, hosted by Adios Barbie and Nita, on Monday, February 24th, from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Until next time.